Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to this midweek review with Mr. John. I, of course, am Mr. John, and we have been hitting Moses. We have been talking about Moses so much, and we are going to continue our story of Moses and the Israelites. If you remember last time we talked, we saw the Israelites kind of grumbling about not getting things that they felt they needed or had to have, like water. Well, we got to have water and food. Yeah, we got to have food. And yet, every time they cried out, Moses took it to God and he was supplied with water. Remember, he threw that block of wood or a piece of wood or a tree branch or whatever into a well that was contaminated with nasty water that would make you sick or die. And it cleaned the water and everybody was able to drink. And then God brought food by bringing quail and manna from the sky to feed everybody. And we saw that God put some rules, some stipulations that you needed to follow. You couldn't take more food than you needed for the day. Remember that? And these were rules that God put in place. Well, they're still walking to the promised land. And it's funny, we see that God is supplying every time. And they go walking a little bit, and of course, they're out in this wilderness. And then when we think of wilderness, we think of trees. This is not a jungle. This is like more like a wasteland, more like a desert type area. Very dry, not much rain, no water coming. And so when they are walking, the heat gets to them, and you got to imagine 1,000,000 people, right? 1,000,000 people is a lot of people, right? And so they're walking, and soon their walking feet start to get tired, and the heat is there, and well, they've been chugging their canteens and drinking all the water they have, and they've run out. And soon they start complaining about water again. And instead of sitting there and maybe asking Moses, hey, Moses, can you go to God and maybe ask him to, we're a little tapped out on the water here. No, they start grumbling and complaining. And every time they grumble and complain, they always say, they look back to what they had in Egypt, right? They had water, yes. They had food, yes. But they also had 400 years of slavery and 400 years of crying out to God to release them. Well, God releases them, and yet they have these little hard times. And I'm sure not having water and being very thirsty feels like a very hard time, but they keep just losing track of all the things that God has done to supply them. And so they complain. Oh, come on, Moses, we're dying here. We could have been back in Egypt. We could be drinking from the wells there, and it's so good. And yet, Moses pretty well does a good job of every time he hears a complaint, he goes to God, and God gives him a commandment. Well, this time, God sits there and says, hey, listen, I need you to go see that rock formation over there. It's pretty good sized, right? I need you to go there. And the staff that you held out when you split the Red Sea, I need you to go over there and hit that thing. And when you hit it, water will flow out of it like a fountain. Whoa, dude, that sounds amazing. So here goes Moses. He's walking through, and I'm sure, he's walking through a crowd, and 1,000,000 people are hovering around him, and he's rah, 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 grumbling and grumbling, and he just goes on, and he does what God says. Whack! He hits that rock, and bloosh, water comes flowing out of it like a stream. It's just flowing. Enough water is coming out of this rock to fulfill the thirst of all these million Israelite people, that God's people who are traveling. And probably enough to animals to have some water on hand, just everything. They get enough water to sustain them to go on. Well, we see Moses and the Israelites continue their track, and there's a few things, but again, thirst comes upon the people, and they start to whine and complain. And I'm sure every time they whine and complain, it starts to weigh on Moses a little bit. Have you ever noticed that when you're around somebody that's it's kind of a negative Nelly, or just doesn't see the joy in things, always the negative side, and they always seem to complain? When they get around you, how that negativity and that griping and complaining kind of just starts to weigh on you. It's, I don't really want to hear about this. I really don't care that you didn't have Fruit Loops this morning. You had to eat Lucky Charms, and Fruit Loops is your favorite cereal. You know, man, come on. Lucky Charms is great cereal. I don't know why you're complaining, right? I wish I'd have had Lucky Charms this morning, but not complaining. But we kind of get weary, and the thing about complaining, I think it's contagious, right? When somebody sits there, oh man, Mrs. Jones, she gives so much homework. I wish she wouldn't give so much. I hate homework, and Mrs. Jones gives so much homework, it's just driving me crazy. And all of a sudden, you kind of sit there and you hear that and you go, yeah, Mrs. Jones does give a lot of homework. I wish she would. So complaining is kind of contagious. Well, the Israelite people running out of water again, and the complaining starts. And come on, Moses, looking back again, Moses, we could have been back in Egypt. We could have stayed at this where the rock you hit last time was so pouring out water. We could have stayed there. Oh, this promised land is so far away, and oh, come on, man. And so Moses again takes it to God, and he sits there and, God, the people are needing water, and what am I supposed to do? And God comes to Moses and he says, you see that rock formation? Here's what I need you to do. Do not hit the rock. I need you to speak into the rock, and water will flow from the rock when you speak from it. And I kind of have a sneaking suspicion that Moses takes that, and that was his intention. He was going to go and speak into the rock. And then he starts to walk through the crowd, and they're whining and complaining and Moses, we're so thirsty. Come on, Moses. We were better off back in Egypt. I don't know why we keep continuing to walk. My feet are getting blistered, and come on, man. I'm thirsty. It's hot out here. Bring us some water. 1,000,000 people just hovering around Moses, and he's got to walk through the crowd, banging through, and everybody's whining and complaining, and I'm sure they're angry and maybe a little pushing and shoving. And by the time Moses gets to the rock formation, he might have been a little irritated. And he gets up to the rock, and instead of speaking into the rock like God asked him to do and told him to do, he takes his staff again and whack! He hits the rock like he did the first time. But remember, he was told not to hit the rock. He was told to speak into the rock. This was God's order. It was kind of God's rule for Moses in this, right? It's like when the manna came from the sky and they're told not to take more than a day's worth. It was a decree given by God to see if the people would follow. And Moses didn't follow. But God, in his grace and in his glory, he allows water to flow from the rocks. Like the fountain did before, enough water to flow and give the people plenty of water and their animals, and enough probably to fill canteens and vases and jars and all that stuff, right? The water's flowing. But God calls Moses over and says, hey, listen, for your disobedience, for you disobeying me, you will not get to go into the promised land. You will get to see the promised land, but you won't get to enter. Now, it sounds kind of rough, right? That sounds kind of rough. But here's the thing. Moses knew he had done wrong, and he accepts his punishment, right? If you do something wrong, don't you have to accept the consequences for your actions, right? If, say, you stay up too late and your mom says, well, listen, because you stayed up too late last night, you're going to get an early bedtime for the next week. And so you have to abide by your parents' rules because they're in charge. God's in charge here. And Moses disobeyed. So our verses coming up, we're going to continue talking about Moses again this month and carry on. And I hope you guys, this is a new verse, so I hope you're checking it out. Look it up, check it out in your Bible, or see it on here. But memorize these and get them into your heart, guys. We want to talk to you next time. We hope that you're having a great week. We'll talk to you later. Bye. I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. Isaiah 43:19.